I'm here today sort of to paint the picture of why we're in that problem. I wish I could be like Secretary Jones, because I'm like him. I'm actually an optimist, and I'm a glass half full person, like he obviously is. But I always seem to have to get up and give you the bad news. So I'm going to have to do that today and paint this picture and give you an idea of why you're going to hear what you're going to hear tomorrow from the governor. So let's go right to it. This chart, what this chart is showing you is the growth in general fund revenue all the way back to 1989. And what I've done is I've put in where the U.S. recessions were. And I actually worked through, in some capacity, for 31 years, back in the early 80s. And I've never seen, in those 31 years I've worked here, Virginia decline in general fund revenues, that you're going to hear tomorrow, about probably 1.6%, when the U.S. was not in a recession. And the last time we had these declines, I pointed out, those were obviously recession years in the United States. So Delgo Bannon and Maurice Jones described quite well some of the reasons for that. The biggest reason is our reliance on federal defense spending, in particular, but federal contract procurement spending in general. And so that's a bubble that's bursting, and that's not a growth industry anymore. So we have two reasons, really. We have two reasons, I'm not sure how to use something else, why we have this decline right here. The first short-term reason is, as was described, is we had, basically, we went from final payments in May, we were $350 million less than we had last year. We actually had final payments in May of this year, lesser than we had 2 years ago. And so that, with the stock market increase of 25%, people knew that there was going to be this double counting because of the increase in federal taxes, and so people were going to front load their payments into 12, but not to the degree they did. And they also felt, the forecasters, that there was still going to be at least some effect of this large stock market gain. But they didn't see the effect they thought they were going to get. Now the good news is, next May, what are we going to see? The forecasters are not going to be able to forecast that. I'm, again, the glass half full, the optimist. I say there may be some upside potential next May. You'll never see that forecasted, though. Tomorrow or December, they're going to have to wait till next May to see what happens with the growth in the stock market. People start cashing in gains, etc., to see what that does with the tax revenues. So that's the first immediate issue. But the issue that's actually the larger issue that's contributing to the problem now, and you're going to hear about this new biennium that we're just starting, what the real problem is going to be this our economy, our overall economy, and the growth of Virginia's economy. And as was pointed out, we are #1 in defense procurement. Some of the statistics, in fiscal 13, defense spending nationally declined by 7%. The first 10 months of this year, federal defense spending has declined another 6%. That's hitting Virginia directly in our high-paid employment areas. What that's going to do is it's going to lower this economy that's especially the federal side of it, is going to lower payroll withholding forecasts to even lower than what they put in place in the June just adopted budget. They're going to have to lower them even further, is my prediction. And it's going to go to below 3%, more than the 2.5% level. It was at 4% 3 or 4 months ago. They were expecting 4% growth. Well, that's going to decline quite a bit, and that's 2/3 of our general fund payroll withholding. So these are some of the defense numbers I just mentioned. You can see right here, Shimura Economics, they were able to trace from 12 to 13 alone, a decline of $54 to $41 billion in federal procurement. I'm sure it's declined, as I mentioned, overall defense spending has declined the first 10 months. That's declined even more. So that's the direct problem that we're having and going forward. So Maurice's discussion about where we go was right on point. What do we do to create growth industries in Virginia? I'm going to throw out one additional piece of information. There's a great book that I read about a year ago called The New Geography of Jobs by Enrico because I think on top of what the Secretary said, we need to become an innovation economy as well. And that's where the real job, high-paid job growth is. In Virginia, you know, if you look, we're very highly educated, but we don't create patents. Read that book. Northern Virginia is a dearth of patent creation. That's not where these, really, the innovation economies are in this country. It's places, Silicon Valley, Austin, the Raleigh, Durham area, Boston. It's not Northern Virginia. That's not the innovation. That's a managerial economy up there, high-paid people. So I think we need to create an innovation economy as well. Now, some of the statistics. This is what payroll withholding looks like. Payroll employment looks like. And it accelerated the decline after sequestration. That's when really these declines in federal spending really started accelerating. And there's a direct relationship to our payrolls. Look at how we've diverged from overall U.S. growth. So I give you my mea culpa. Last year, a year ago, I was kind of optimistic. I was thinking that we were going to continue to improve in Virginia because my 31 years of experience, we outgrew the U.S. All of a sudden, that's not the case for the reasons we're talking about now. And I missed that as well a year ago, that this was going to hit as hard as it did, and Virginia was going to be impacted as much as it has. So, you know, we are, you know, quite apparent how far we're underperforming U.S. growth. And that's showing up even, he's right, we do have still relatively unemployment, but it's starting to tick up, and that gap between the rest of the country and us is shrinking. This is what our economy looks like, and it's a different way of looking at it. And throughout this list, there are. It's not just direct government employment. This is federal, state, local here, but this professional business service line. This is where a lot of these high-paid people work in that industry, in that federal procurement industry. You know, the General Dynamics, the Lockheeds, the SEICs, the Booz Allens. People that work are showing up in this. And you can see our economy. We have a great percentage of those types of people in Virginia. And so we're more vulnerable if it starts to not grow. And look at this slide. This was a year-over-year growth. You can see right here, these are the high-paid 100,000 plus jobs. Negative 2%. More than negative 2% of year-over-year growth in the high-paid jobs in that professional business and technical services category. That's why we're seeing this line. So I traced. So we have about zero employment growth going on right now in Virginia overall. What are we losing? We're actually losing it in the 100,000, the hot 80,000, 100,000 plus jobs. It's gone from greater than 18%. What I showed you in that last graph to the most recent data, below 18%. Well, look at these are really the low-paid service jobs. These are the restaurant workers, the people who work, you know, in the healthcare industry, not the doctors, but the people who are working in the lower-paid jobs, in the hospitality industry. That's what's growing. That's our jobs that are growing in that zero employment economy. The high-paid ones are not. And I dramatize this by giving you the list of who gets paid what on a weekly basis. These are the jobs that we're losing, minus 2% up here. These are the jobs we're gaining down here at the bottom on a weekly wage basis. So that's the core of the situation going on now. And then go back to Secretary Jones and why, you know, he's laying out what we need to do to arrest that and change course. So it shows up in, you know, basically zero wage and salary growth, or near zero, versus the rest of the country doing much better. And then our tax revenues, the 2/3 of what I described, not the final payments, which was the immediate problem because of the tax, you know, federal tax changes, but the ongoing problem, the ongoing payroll holding problem. Steadily, the 12-month moving average has gone down to 2%. And I'm hoping it's not going to continue to go down even more. That's the most recent right here. But the question becomes, are we still declining? Now that, you know, people don't have wages and salaries to spend, you have lower amount, less money. It also translates into fewer taxable sales. But that's 20%, a little less than 20% of the general fund. Still a good chunk. Not as important as income taxes, but sales taxes are important, especially at the local level. That's not even counting the local 1% in the transportation revenue as well. What was happening in tax to sales? I plotted both cities and counties. The counties below, it's gone negative. Well, we recovered from the recession, it's gone back negative again. And then, because people don't have as much money, there's not as much growth. That's also showing up in house prices. Not as much demand for houses in Virginia. So the growth in our housing starts below the U.S. as well. So it's percolating through our entire economy in Virginia. What's happening? Now, we switch briefly to the budget, because you're going to have Betsy, I'm sure they're here, Betsy Daly, Percent Finance, and Joe Flores are going to give you some more detail about the state budget. They're going to fill in the detail more than I am. I'm going to paint you a little bit of a broad picture. All these numbers, you got off in the last two speakers, you have to look at the charts, you have to look at the numbers. I'm not as good a speaker as them, so I have to use them. But I want to point out a couple things. What I've plotted for you here by secretarial area essentially is the adopted state budget. This is the adopted state budget. You have in your packet. If you don't want to go back and look at it, it can give you an idea of where we spend our money on the state's general fund budget. Well, in the middle, that's your direct aid to public ed. And so the last line, I'm showing you how much additional funding is being spent in 15 over 14. Well, so where are the money changing? Now, even though we have this problem, we actually were going to transfer $500 million from 14 to 15. Well, that's now down to the adopted budget of $128 million. And because the downfall is going to be greater than $350 million, which is what they assumed when they adopted the June 23rd budget, it's going to be probably $89 million more than that, the downturn in revenues. That 128 is going to be even less to transfer to help pay for this. So that's going to be, it's probably going to be $40 million unless they find balances and sweep them up, unspent balances, which they probably will. They always do. But that was over $500 million going to spend money here, and it's not there anymore. So this is a placeholder budget. What I'm showing you down here at the bottom is they built in savings and rainy day fund into that budget to anticipate what's going to happen. Tomorrow, what I think is going to be told to you is that you're going to have not this $1.5 billion problem that they built into this budget. You're going to have a $2 billion, maybe even more problem for the next few years, this year, next year. So you can start looking at this and say, well, where are they going to come up with the additional I hope I'm wrong, $400 or $500 million, but all signs of that's what the governor's going to tell you tomorrow. And they may even have to put in some emergency measures to balance 2015, sort of like what happened in 2009 and 10, when it hit all of a sudden, everything, hit the fan, and Governor King at that time had to put emergency reductions in place to balance out the fiscal year we had already started. I'm fearing that's what's going to be told to you tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So these numbers right here are going to change. This 15 over 14. Where are they spending money now? The $74 million debt service, that's not going to change. That's already built in. They can't change that. That debt has already been floated. Those bills are already due. That can't change. So car tax, that's not going to change. Rainy day fund, that's not going to change. Medicaid, they may pare back where they can any additional inflation increases to hospital nursing homes that are built. There's a little bit left. They pare back most of it. They'll probably take out even all of the inflation increases for hospitals, nursing homes. So that may go down some. This $107 million, that's the mental health initiative. A lot of that's the mental health initiative. Will they cut that? I don't know. Where are they going to go? They're going to have to go to that number. What that is, the $257 million, that's all that's left of the re-benchmarking increase in K-12 and in the currently adopted budget. They were able to protect that in that June budget. They took out the new discretionary spending in K-12, a little bit of that, they took that out. The balance what they had on their $1.5 billion problem, it's higher. There's not a whole lot of places they can go. General government has been squeezed. There's not that much money there. The money that's discretionary in effect is what goes to localities. It's the HB 59, it's the K-12. You know, it's, yes, higher ed, because they can put that, I've told you this before, they can raise tuition on students and parents. That will probably cut more. So that budget problem goes up. They're going to have to go back to those places that are discretionary, and that's aid to localities and higher education in the main. Because one thing they're probably not going to do, and I think Betsy will tell you this, is they're not going to revisit VRS. They're not going to save money by cutting VRS contributions. They have a plan in place that's expected to continue, especially at Wall Street and our debt ratings. They're not going to, I don't believe they will revisit that. She'll probably reiterate that to you as well. So that's why, you know, here, maybe a little bit of public safety in sheriffs, and particularly 599, but there's not a lot of places they can go. They protected what they could in the first round. The second round is going to get tough. Now I'll give you a little look over the last 10 years, including this adopted budget, where the money's gone. And the reason why you can't cut Medicaid is because that's healthcare costs and utilization. We have a very lean Medicaid program. As you know, that's what the fight about expansion is. Because we have a lean Medicaid program in Virginia. We're ranked like 48th in the country. That's driven by healthcare costs nationwide, as well as, you know, especially costs for long-term care, disabled elderly long-term care. So that's this line. Last 10 years, it's grown 100%. This, debt service, because we quit having a pay-as-you-go capital program, you know, about 10 years ago, maybe 15. We quit having it. We tried to have it in the boom years in the middle 2000s. That all got taken away when we had the recession. So our capital flow is debt, it's flow debt. And now those bills are coming due, and that's why we've gone from, I'll show you the chart, $200 million a year debt service payments to $700 million a year general fund debt service payment. That's not going to be cut either, as I mentioned. So look at K-12, the main driver of aid to locality. That's grown 12%, that's grown 12% over the entire 10-year period. You know, that's not even keeping up with inflation, let alone per pupil increases. So you're feeling that at the local level. And I'm going to show you a chart here, and I've adjusted these. This includes lottery, this includes the special funding that the feds provided during the recession, the stimulus monies, which was, you know, I think $700–800 million. It includes all that. This is all the appropriated state money, local governments. You can see the high water mark, and I've adjusted it by the CPI, which is only on average about 2%. So it's not, you know, inflation's been pretty low. It's only been 2%. But even with that, that starts to accumulate over time. And when you add in the growth in pupils, and you do it on a per pupil basis, you can see the high water mark is 2009. Well, even this adopted budget, even though more dollars were put in at $257 million in 15 over 14, and then a little bit more, not much, pretty much the same thing in 16, because it's pretty much level funded with re-benchmark. You can see what happens. When you adjust it by pupils and inflation, that's the per dollar amount. That's, you know, at the local level, you have to pay the cost on real nominal dollars. I mean, that's what you're having to pay. So the aid from the state on that kind of adjusted basis is declining quite a bit. Just to show you that chart on debt, so one of the items that you know, tomorrow the governor's not going to be able to change. We've pretty much done all the refundings, refinancings at lower rates, saved where we can on things that have been already issued at higher rates. That's been done. The Department of Treasury, that's their job to do that. So they're on top of that. This is still line in general fund debt service payments because we have a you know, a capital program that uses debt. Now, let me show you a little more detailed version. You've seen this before. These are all the programs, and you can make slight adjustments to this on which program you define as aid to local, which you don't. This is pretty close, and Betsy Daly has about the same numbers I do in total. The total, what I include lottery, because that's essentially general funds. It's just general funds at a different name. So this is how much is going back over the biennial, the 2-year period, current adopted budget. This is what the total appropriations are right now, and that'll change, as I described probably. This is the line at the bottom, getting of the state budget in these exact same programs over time that I've included here. So you've gone from 52% of the state's general fund to 46. So yes, the state budget has grown somewhat over time, but your share of it, even though it hasn't grown as fast as we all want because of our economy, your share of that, because why? Because Medicaid has to be funded and has been growing faster than growth in general funds, and because we have the debt program for our capital, that has to be funded now, debt service. So what's left over is less, and that's why we're at 46%. We keep ticking down the amount of, a relative amount of money going from these local programs. And the biggest one, of course, by far, is direct aid to K-12. So, starting to get close to my ending here. You know, Secretary Jones, he described quite well my question here. You know, how do we replace these jobs? I mean, that's his job, and that's what he's talking about. So that's my question. We're losing, you know, the growth industry in our economy was, you know, especially throughout the 2000s, was defense procurement, and people made a lot of money in that industry. And that bubble has burst, and it's not a growth industry. So how do we replace that? Where do we get the growth in high-paid jobs? Medicaid, at some point, is going to have to change the growth trajectory. It'll eat up everything, you know, healthcare costs, not just Medicaid, healthcare costs in general. But at least for the next biennium, I don't see that happening. Go back to that previous chart, and we grew public ed 15 or 14 by 250, 60 million. We grew Medicaid, which is smaller total dollars, by 357 million. Even with all this attention on it, all these reform attention, we still are growing that faster than public ed, which is a larger absolute dollar program still. But it's catching up. Medicaid is catching up. It's now about 21% of our general fund budget. You know, it was, you know, 20 years ago less than 10%. Now it's 21%. As I described, we've got a plan in place to continue increasing until we get to 100% funded our VRS program for teachers and state employees. That plan will probably stay in place, but that's going to engender higher rates because we're not at the rates that we need to get to 100% funding. So those rates, even though they increased 24% for you this biennium on average, that's going to continue to increase. Expect that to be so. Not only hit the local budget, it's going to hit the state budget. Well, they have to pay part of that as well. Debt service that's not going to slow. That's going to continue going up. Although I will say this, with this decrease in revenue, and I think we have this on the agenda at some point, our debt capacity is going to, we're going to see a lower debt capacity. The ability to float more debt is going to be impacted. So that actually, at least sometime in the future, we haven't actually issued all the authorized debt yet. We've authorized that, it hasn't been issued, so, but in the future, we may not be able to authorize as much, or we may have to put a hiatus on that for a while, authorizing new debt. And then we still have more general funds scheduled to come out, more general funds to go to transportation scheduled. We're not through with that. That phase-in of HB 2313 is not through, taking sales tax for transportation, that's not done. So we're still going to be moving funds from the general fund to transportation as well. That will impact the general fund. So let's look at the local revenue trends, how you guys are doing. And you're starting to recover, but I only have 2013, I don't have 14. I get this from the AP, the Article of Public Accounts data. That's pretty simple got. But you've gotten, through last year, you got to the 2% level. You might have a better idea than I do how your 14 went. I know that some of you had to raise your taxes and your tax rates. So this includes tax increases, by the way. And there are some. You're only at the 2% growth level. So you still got that problem. Real estate has not recovered and fully, and I know it hasn't gone back to where it was. What are the prospects for it? I don't think the prospects in the near to medium term are anything like what they were when we were growing here. So we can't rely on getting back to probably even 5 or 6% growth in your next 2 years without tax increases on real estate. And so these are some of the things in the latest survey we had. There wasn't a whole lot of, we only had about 50 or so the same as what it was in the previous years. You did the same things to the state. You used your reserves, you delayed capital and maintenance expenditures, you froze salaries, you didn't fill vacancies, you had direct cuts where you could, even some across the board cuts. So you did all those things, and you probably got pretty lean budgets, and you're probably fairly structurally balanced. So you're in that posture, but you don't have those reserves anymore. You haven't given salary increases for a long time. So in the next round, the economic downturn hits, you may not be in as good a place as you were 5 or 6 years ago. You might have a better cushion in than you do now, although you've certainly got some experience in dealing with downturns, so at least you have that. Now, I just showed you this chart because it varies by locality greatly. But on average, about a third of your revenue is coming from the state. So it's not like it's the majority of your revenue, but it is at the margin going to be important. It's important, particularly to your schools, where the majority of the state money comes from. Now, I have a few slides at the end. The good news is, as Secretary Jones said, we are a wealthy state. We're one of the top 10 wealthiest states. And that's why I do have some optimism about next May, about some of these great gains in the stock market translating into tax revenue that might not be anticipated happening. But we ranked pretty low as a percentage of our wealth. I don't care what you hear from other people. I've seen articles about it. We rank low as a percentage of our wealth on taxes in Virginia. Now, the locals have to do more. You have to tax more to make up for what the state doesn't do. So that's also true. We rank higher than a local if you're making up for it. And you look at some articles, some op-eds that talk about it on a per capita basis. But that's like comparing our absolute taxes to Mississippi's wealth. And that doesn't really compute in my brain. So as a percentage of wealth, we're fairly low. On a per capita, yes, we're higher, but that's because we're a wealthy state. And then our spending is under control. When you rank us compared to other states and what we do, our spending, we control our spending pretty well. We don't rank high spending, especially when you consider the wealth we have. So that's the unfortunate primer for the governor tomorrow. Yeah, I know Betsy's going to get into this more. The rainy day fund is at about $950 million after they make that required deposit from last year's surpluses. There's a 2-year lag from the time they actually calculate how much is due and when it's actually deposited, so it's just reserved. It's already there. But it's about $950 million. They're going to take $707 million in 2 chunks. That's the plan. Because you can only take half of it each time, half of what's there. So they're going to take the first half, and then they'll take the second half. So they'll leave, it'll be left with only a couple $100 million left, 707 out of the 950. But that's part of that plan to fund that $1.5 billion shortfall they identified in June. They're not going to go take any more, really, essentially. So if it goes, like I said, the problem gets larger. The rainy day fund is not going to be useful beyond what's already there.
We're going to move right into our next presentation because it's going to be a similar topic. So if there's time at the end, we can have more questions as well.